picture this. You're in Sacramento back in 1977 at a town hall meeting about a serial rapist who's been terrorizing the community.
Yeah, everyone's on edge.
Exactly. And then weeks later, you become his next victim.
It really is a chilling thought, isn't it? That even in ordinary settings like a town hall meeting, we can cross paths with, the darkest sides of humanity.
Yeah, it's unsettling. And that's the kind of thing that makes true crime so compelling. It forces us to confront that darker side.
Yeah.
That evil can really be lurking anywhere. And today we're doing a deep dive into the very first episode of a true crime phenomenon, the podcast, My Favorite Murder.
Oh, yeah, this is a classic.
It is. And this episode was recorded back in 2016.
Wow, 2016, that feels like a lifetime ago.
It does. Obama was president, David Bowie had just passed away,
Yeah.
and true crime podcasts hosted by two women.
Especially two women, right?
Yeah, that was pretty rare back then.
Yeah.
And the hosts, Karen and Georgia, they were still finding their footing. They had no idea how huge their show would become.
And what's fascinating is they chose to discuss two infamous cases in this first episode. The unsolved murder of JonBenét Ramsey and the Golden State Killer. And what's crazy is the Golden State Killer was actually caught just 2 years after this episode aired.
Wow.
It makes you think about how much has changed in the world of true crime just in the past few years.
Yeah, and those two cases, they really do represent two different sides of true crime.
Right.
You've got the JonBenét Ramsey case, which is all about the mystery, the media frenzy, and then the Golden State Killer, a terrifying predator who operated for years.
And left behind so many victims.
So many victims. So let's rewind back to 2016. Picture Karen and Georgia recording in a spare bedroom, totally unaware that they're about to launch this true crime empire.
I love that image. Just two friends, a microphone, and their passion for true crime.
Yeah, and you can really hear the nervous energy in their voices in this first episode. They're casual, a bit flippant at times, and still figuring out their dynamic.
It's interesting, though, because I think that naivete about the sensitivity surrounding true crime actually made the show more authentic, it felt like.
Yeah.
Two friends genuinely discussing their fascination with these cases.
Totally. And I think that's what resonated with so many listeners. It felt real. It felt relatable. So Karen kicks things off with the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, a case that totally captivated the nation back in 1996.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. It was everywhere.
It was. And Karen admits that she initially found the case boring. Boring. Until she started digging into the bizarre details.
Well, there are a lot of those.
Oh, there are. Even today, the JonBenét case is still a puzzle. So many twists and turns, red herrings, questionable evidence.
It just seems to defy logic.
Right. So Karen starts laying out some of the most unsettling details, like the incredibly long ransom note.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. 3 handwritten pages.
3 pages. And it was written on a notepad from the house.
Which is so strange.
Right. It makes you wonder about its authenticity. Was it even a real ransom note?
And could it have been someone in the family?
And then there's that oddly specific ransom amount, $118,000, which just happened to be the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus.
What are the odds? That always seems so suspicious.
It does make you think about John Ramsey's possible involvement. Was it just a coincidence?
Or was it calculated?
It's just one of the many details that makes this case so baffling. And then there's the whole pineapple situation.
Oh, yeah, the pineapple, that's a weird one.
It is a weird one. It was reported that JonBenét had eaten pineapple before she died, and there was a bowl of pineapple with a spoon on the dining room table.
And the fingerprints on the bowl belonged to her brother Burke.
Even though the parents claimed they put JonBenét straight to bed when they got home from a Christmas party that night.
It's like, why lie about that? It just makes everything seem more suspicious.
It does, and then you listen to the 911 call made by Patsy Ramsey, and there's something about her tone that just feels off.
Yeah, she doesn't sound like a mother whose daughter has just been kidnapped.
Right. Instead of crying out, "My daughter is missing," she says, "We have a kidnapping." It's so detached, so impersonal.
It's like she's constructing a narrative trying to control the situation.
And then there's the handwriting analysis of the ransom note. The experts pretty much concluded that it matched Patsy Ramsey's handwriting.
But didn't she write out the ransom amount differently when she was asked to reproduce it?
Yeah, she wrote it out on words, $118,000. Instead of using numerals like in the ransom note as such a crucial detail, why would she change her writing style like that?
It's almost like she was trying too hard to make it look different.
It is, and this inconsistency, along with the handwriting analysis, it really casts a shadow of suspicion on Patsy Ramsey.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore.
And Karen, she clearly believes that the parents were involved somehow, potentially covering up for their son, Burke, who had a history of behavioral issues.
Oh, and wasn't there something about Burke hitting JonBenét with a golf club?
Yeah, sometime before the murder, it's a chilling detail. Makes you
Mhm.
wonder about the family dynamics. Was there violence in the home?
And wasn't Burke also not questioned by police for like a month after the murder?
A whole month. That gave him and his parents plenty of time to get their story straight.
That's a major red flag. Why wouldn't they question him immediately?
It's just one of the many things that makes this case so frustrating. And then there's the final chilling detail. John Ramsey discovering JonBenét's body in the basement
In a wine cellar. Right.
in a rarely used wine cellar, even though the police had already searched the house multiple times. And then he removes the duct tape from her mouth and carries her body upstairs.
It just seems so staged.
It is almost too suspicious to believe. So even decades later, the JonBenét Ramsey case remains unsolved. Theories continue to swirl. But we may never know the truth about what happened to that little girl on Christmas Eve in 1996.
It's a tragic case, and it really shows how elusive justice can be, especially when you have a potentially compromised crime scene and a family that seems more concerned with protecting their image than cooperating with investigators.
And after Karen lays out all the details of the JonBenét Ramsey case, it's Georgia's turn to share her favorite murder.
And she chooses the Golden State Killer.
She does.
Yeah.
Or, as he was known at the time, the East Area Rapist. And this is where the episode takes a more personal turn.
Oh, so.
Georgia reveals that she attended college in Sacramento, living very close to the areas where the East Area Rapist committed many of his crimes.
Oh, wow. That must have been terrifying.
It must have been, and it really adds a layer of immediacy and weight to her story. It's one thing to read about these crimes in a newspaper, but it's another to know that this guy was terrorizing neighborhoods you were familiar with.
Places you might have even visited.
Exactly. It brings the terror closer to home, reminds us that these crimes happen in real communities, affecting real people.
Not just characters in a story.
And the details of the Golden State Killer's crimes are truly chilling. This wasn't just some random act of violence. He meticulously planned his attacks, often breaking into his victims' homes beforehand to hide rope and familiarize himself with the layout.
That's so creepy. Imagine knowing someone had been in your house watching you.
Waiting for the right moment to strike? It's terrifying, and the assaults themselves were brutal. He'd blind his victims with a flashlight, force the woman to tie up her partner,
And then put a stack of dishes on the man's back.
threatening to kill them both
Yeah.
if he heard any movement. It's like he was playing a twisted game with them.
A game with their lives.
And as if that wasn't disturbing enough, he'd often speak to himself in a high-pitched voice during the assaults, chanting threats or just random phrases.
I remember reading about that some experts thought it was a form of dissociation, a way to distance himself from what he was doing.
Others thought it was a deliberate tactic to dehumanize his victims and exert control.
Either way, it's just so creepy. Yeah, it really is. And, he was so methodical, so good at blending in, that he managed to evade capture for decades.
It's crazy he was active all over California, from Sacramento to the East Bay, down to places like Visalia and Goleta, even Irvine.
And that was over what? A span of like 10 years.
More than that. He started in the mid-'70s and wasn't caught until 2018. It's mind-boggling how he slipped through the cracks for so long.
It really makes you think about how many other seemingly cold cases might be solved with today's technology and investigative techniques.
Exactly. Cases that seemed hopeless might actually have a chance at resolution.
It's a thought that brings both hope and a touch of melancholy hope, because advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, are giving us new tools to revisit old cases and potentially identify perpetrators who thought they had gotten away with their crimes.
It's incredible how DNA technology has revolutionized crime solving.
But it's also melancholy because it reminds us of the countless families who have yet to find closure, who still carry the burden of unanswered questions and unresolved grief.
And thankfully, in the case of the Golden State Killer, justice did eventually prevail.
He was finally identified as Joseph James DeAngelo, a seemingly ordinary man living an ordinary life, hiding a monstrous secret.
It was a shock to a lot of people, especially those who knew him personally. They never suspected he was capable of such horrific acts.
It just goes to show you that you never really know who you're dealing with.
And it's incredible to think that this arrest happened just 2 years after Karen and Georgia discussed the case on their podcast. Imagine their surprise when a case they thought might never be solved was suddenly closed. It highlights the power of persistence, the importance of keeping these stories alive in the public consciousness.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the crucial role played by Michelle McNamara, the writer who coined the name Golden State Killer and dedicated years of her life to researching and writing about the case. Her work culminated in the posthumously published book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which brought renewed attention to the case and helped to keep the pressure on law enforcement.
It's a testament to the impact that dedicated individuals, even outside of law enforcement, can have on the pursuit of justice. And speaking of impact, it's interesting to note how Karen and Georgia themselves evolved in their approach to true crime. They mentioned in this first episode that they received a lot of listener feedback early on, pointing out that their casual, sometimes flippant tone was disrespectful, and that they needed to be more diligent about citing their sources.
It's commendable that they were open to that feedback and adjusted their approach. It demonstrates a willingness to learn and grow, a recognition that true crime is not just entertainment, but a genre that demands sensitivity and respect for the victims and their families.
It's a lesson that many true crime creators have had to learn as the genre has grappled with its own ethical considerations and its responsibility to portray these stories accurately and empathetically.
And they were also surprisingly open about their own personal struggles with anxiety. They joke about being clinically anxious and how talking about true crime is their way of coping with the uncertainties and dangers of the world. It's a vulnerability that likely resonated with many listeners, creating a sense of shared experience and understanding.
That vulnerability was a key ingredient in their success. It helped to forge a strong connection with their audience, creating a sense of community around a shared fascination with true crime. It's a reminder that even as we delve into the darkness, human connection can offer solace and a sense of shared humanity.
It's like finding comfort in shared fears and anxieties.
And they brilliantly invited listeners to share their own hometown crime stories, recognizing that everyone has a fascination with the darker side of life, and that sharing these stories can be a way of processing fear and finding connection.
That was a brilliant move. It created a sense of inclusivity, acknowledging that true crime is not just something we consume passively, but a phenomenon that touches all of our lives in some way. It invited listeners to become part of the conversation, to share their own experiences and perspectives.
And clearly it worked. My Favorite Murder quickly gained a massive following, becoming a true crime phenomena. Looking back at this first episode, it's amazing to see how it all started, with two friends, a microphone, and a shared passion for exploring the dark side of human nature.
It's a classic example of how authenticity, vulnerability, and a genuine passion for a topic can resonate with an audience on a deep level, creating a community that extends far beyond the podcast itself.
It's incredible to see how far they've come since those early days of nervous giggling and off-the-cuff remarks. They've become advocates of victims' rights, using their platform to raise awareness about important issues, like the backlog of untested rape kits.
It shows that even though they started with a somewhat naive approach, they were willing to listen, learn, and use their platform for good. Their evolution reflects the broader evolution of the true crime genre itself, as it has moved beyond sensationalism toward a more nuanced and responsible approach to storytelling. And it's a reminder, too, that true crime isn't just about the thrill of the case, you know?
No, it's not.
There are real people who are affected by these crimes.
Victims, families, communities.
Exactly, and their stories deserve to be heard.
And their memories honored.
Absolutely. So as we continue to explore true crime, let's make sure we do it with sensitivity and respect.
And a commitment to justice.
And remember, this is just a glimpse into the vast and ever-evolving world of true crime.
Right.
There are countless other cases out there.
Each with its own unique story.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and never lose sight of those human stories.
Because those are the stories that matter most.
They are.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the first episode of My Favorite Murder.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.